Welcome to the latest interview in the United States Capitol Historical Society's series of oral history interviews. My name is Ron Saracen. I'm a former member of Congress from Connecticut, and I'm president of the United States Capitol Historical Society. This interview with Senator Daniel Inouye is part of a special series featuring Asian Pacific American members of Congress. In these interviews, current and former members have relived their memories of people, places, and events that have shaped their public careers. It is our hope that these recollections will provide listeners with a deeper appreciation for the human dimension of representative government in this temple of liberty we know as the United States Capitol. Senator Daniel K. Inouye was born in Honolulu, Hawaii on September 7th, 1924, and was named after a Methodist minister who had adopted his mother. In March 1943, he enlisted in the U.S. Army's 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the famed Go for Broke Regiment. He saw combat in Italy and southern France and was badly wounded during an engagement for which he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which was later upgraded to the Medal of Honor, our highest award for military valor. With financial assistance from the GI Bill, Inouye graduated from the University of Hawaii and the George Washington University Law School. When Hawaii became a state on August 21, 1959, Daniel Inouye won election to the United States House of Representatives as the new state's first congressman. Later elected to the United States Senate in 1962, he is currently serving his 8th term in the United States Senate. In our earlier interviews in this series, other people we've spoken to have talked about the first time they were sworn in as a member of Congress. And in 1959, you became the first member from Hawaii. What was that like when you were first on the floor of the House of Representatives?
Well, I've spent some time in Washington before this. As you know, I went to law school, but I had never been on the floor of the chamber. And so it was an awesome experience for me to be among a multitude of giants and to have the Speaker of the House swear me in. It was a simple ceremony, but I'll never forget it.
I can imagine. When many members come to Washington, they manage to find a mentor, a senior member who seems to take them under their wing and help them. Was there anyone you looked to at that time, or anyone who kind of looked after you in the early days?
There were several. One was Leo O'Brien, who was the chairman of the Subcommittee on Territories, the committee that had jurisdiction over statehood, and Congressman Wayne Aspinall of Colorado, who was the chairman of the full committee, the Interior Committee. And those two, on day one, took over and told me what to do and what to get and what to buy. And the third person that's most astounding as far as I'm concerned was the Speaker of the House. For example, on my first day, I found myself in my office all by myself with just furnishings, nothing on the wall, and the telephone rang, and it was the Speaker. And he said, "If you're free, come on over." And I didn't know where the Speaker's office was, but on August now, it's a hot day. I didn't know there was a subway. I ran across the ground. Finally made it up the steps, but I learned after that I used a tunnel. And I got to see him, and believe it or not, the Speaker gave me a tour of the Capitol. He was a tour guide. He showed me the shoeshine boy, and he says, "You know, you pay him 25 cents, but if you can afford it, give him a tip. This is the barber shop, this is the bank." And then he took me on the floor, and he said, "That's where I sit, that's where you'll sit. Someday you'll sit there by the chairman's place." And then I am addressed, "Mr. Speaker," and I'll just address you, the gentleman from Hawaii. because I'll be damned if I'm going to call you by your name. He says, I can't pronounce it. And we got to be good friends. He invited me to the Texas table because we had no table, Hawaii table in the dining room. And the Chicago fellas and the Pennsylvania fellas and New York fellas were all good to me.
Like your colleague, Senator Dan Akaka, and former Congressman and Transportation Secretary Norm Mineta, World War II was an important event in their lives and in your life as well. You served in the most highly decorated unit in the history of the United States Army and received the Bronze Star, Distinguished Service Cross, and the Medal of Honor. Can you tell us what you learned from that experience, and how did that experience impact your public career?
Well, there are certain things that haunt me, even to this day, and that is the realization that war can change a person's character and personality, that one might be content in saying, I'm a good person. Now, for example, 1 week before I got into the service, put on my uniform, I was a Sunday school teacher, and I sang in a choir. And my mother was a devout Methodist, Women's Christian Temperance Union. You know, they don't get any more devout than that. And the whole family was that way. And then after training and going overseas, I recall killing the first German. And the thing that haunts me is that I was jubilant. I was proud. And the fellows around me patted me on the back and said, terrific, Dad, terrific. Now, I just killed a human being. And to think that war can change a person so drastically has been with me all the time. So when it comes to going into war, I am very cautious here. For example, I voted against giving the president the authorization to make a preemptive strike on Iraq because I didn't think it was a war that was fully justified, and it was not a war that we were prepared for. So it's haunted me throughout my life.
Let's talk about how you got involved in politics and in public service. When did you decide to enter public service, and had your previous experiences and your education prepared you for that?
Well, as a young boy, I shattered my arm, compound fracture, and I was deeply impressed by the orthopedic surgeon who fixed me up. And from then on, I decided that my goal in life was to become someone like him, an orthopedic surgeon. Not just a surgeon, but an orthopedic surgeon. And towards that end, I studied. When I got into college, the first semester, I went into pre-med. But then I got old enough to volunteer, so when I got to become 18, I volunteered. And when I was on my final battle, when I was wounded and lost my arm, it became apparent that I couldn't be an orthopedic surgeon, although my professors tried to convince me to stay in medicine in some other field. But I decided something else. And in those days, the military gave you a whole series of examinations, written and otherwise, aptitude tests. And after the whole battery of tests had been completed, the panel concluded that I should be in some sort of activity that involved a lot of people. For example, I should either be a teacher, a social worker, a minister, or politician.
Interesting combination.
I checked out teacher and social worker, and they were getting paid $125 a month in Hawaii, and I said, forget that. You know, you can't raise yourself on that. And the ministry, I felt, was not for me because I'd sinned too much, although my mother thought I'd be fabulous. And that left political activity. And I must confess, I knew zilch about politics. I didn't care for it at that time, but I took a look at it. And when I got into the hospital in Michigan, one of the fellows I met there was Bob Dole, and we became good friends even to this day. And when I asked him, what are your plans? And he, without hesitating, said, I'm going to be a county clerk. After that, I'm going to run for the state house. First opening in the Congress, that's where I'm going. I figured that's a good idea. So I went to law school. I became assistant prosecutor. When the territorial office became available, I ran for that office. And when statehood came along, I got to Congress. A little ahead of Bob.
You were in the territorial legislature then before you came here?
2 terms in the House and part of a term in the Senate.
And then came here as a member of the House. And at that time, who did you come here with at that time?
The House had one
member. Only one member at that time. Oh. You mentioned Senator Dole and the fact that you had been in the hospital with him in Michigan. It's amazing that some of these friendships were formed long before any public service of either one of you. Norm Mineta talks about being a friend of the senator from Wyoming, Al Simpson, and meeting him when he was a Boy Scout, together. And you have a relationship with Bob Dole.
The other one is Phil Hart. The building is named after him. All 3 of us were in the hospital at the same time.
Oh, really?
And all 3 became senators.
That is
just
amazing.
About the same time.
That is amazing. Now, in your senatorial career, you have certainly accomplished a great deal and been here a long time. But one of the, or a couple of the most important congressional investigations in recent history have involved you as well. You've been involved in them as one of the investigators in the Watergate Committee and the Iran-Contra hearings. You mentioned you had been a prosecutor before you came to the House. How much has that background and the service on those committees formed your thoughts regarding public service and the country?
Well, my service as assistant prosecutor didn't mean that much, but one thing that impressed me was that in this land, no one is above the law. In other places, if you're the king or the emperor or the dictator, you're above the law. You make the law. But in the United States, even the president is subject to the law. And he has to answer for his deeds or misdeeds. And that really impressed me. You read about it in books, but to see it in operation is something else. The other thing that impressed me about these hearings was the awesome power of the media and television especially. And up until then, I was totally unknown, other than Hawaii, which is not even 1% of the population. And but after Watergate, I began receiving not just tens of letters, but hundreds and thousands of letters. And one day, Mr. Gallup visited me, and he says, according to the latest poll, the most recognizable person is the President of the United States. And guess who's next to him? He said, it's you. I said, how can I be the one? He said, well, you look different. But the media can be powerful.
One of the important issues facing the nation today is balancing the need for national security while protecting civil rights and maintaining the freedoms that our nation cherishes. What's your perspective on the current situation?
Maintaining security and maintaining our freedoms is absolutely essential. That's true. But to do that at the expense of destroying our human rights and civil rights is not acceptable. I would say that if a matter is so severe that we're on the verge of war, then the people should be aware that certain things are going to happen and are happening. If we are going to tap telephones, I think the people of the United States should be made aware who we're tapping and why we're tapping it. It shouldn't be done in the cover of darkness.
Now, you were first elected to represent Hawaii in the House, and then you've been in the Senate now since 1963. And of your many legislative accomplishments, a couple were the Native Hawaiian Education Act and the Native Hawaiian Health Care Act. Tell us about those and why they were most important to you.
Well, I suppose it goes back to my mother, because my mother was an orphan at the age of 4. Her parents were plantation workers and they were gone. And at that moment, there was no social services in the territory of Hawaii. And so she was literally out on the streets. And along came a young Hawaiian couple, took her hand and took her home. That's the way they do it. Inouye adopted her. And she lived with them as a happy child for a year, and she never forgot that. And she always reminded me what a gentle people, compassionate people these Hawaiians are. But as a result, they have been exploited, taken advantage of. And so it says, you must do your best to protect them. And when I became a politician, Hawaiians were on the bottom of the social and economic and political ladder. And I did my best to see that they're provided with the basic necessities of life, education and health, over and above what we were providing. They lived in the slums. They lived in equivalent of reservations out in the countryside, far away from the center of civilization in Hawaii. So we brought medicine and education out there.
In their recent book, The Broken Branch, veteran congressional scholars Tom Mann and Norm Ornstein argue that increasing partisanship in Congress has undermined both public confidence in the institution as well as its ability to perform its constitutional role. How would you compare your experience in Congress with Congress today? Have you noticed an increasing partisanship, a lack of comity? Has that hindered the ability of Congress to legislate? And what do you see as the solution, assuming there is a problem, what do you see as the solution to the problem?
At times I'd like to describe it as two different worlds. The world that I was introduced to in 1959 was not a partisan world. It was a world in which debates were loud and clear, but after the debates were over, the men would get together for smoke or drink or have dinner together or visit each other, discuss problems. And you found Democrats with their best friends being Republicans and vice versa, which was very common, something you don't see today. And I have tried my very best to be as nonpartisan as I can be. And today it's no secret. One of my best buddies is a man from Alaska. He's a Republican, Ted Stevens. And I like him. We don't agree. In fact, according to the poll, the record keeping, I think we disagree about 70% of the time. But as we agree upon, if we disagree, let's not be disagreeable. And that makes a big difference. When we disagree, yep, we disagree, and we explain as civilly as possible why we do so. But when we agree, we work together hand in glove. As a result, he and I on the Commerce Committee, on the Defense Committee, and if you see the production of these committees, you can see the difference. We are very productive. In fact, the Defense Appropriations Bill for the last 6 years passed unanimously. That's something.
You know, I have a theory about that as well. It's almost as if people get elected today thinking they're supposed to dislike the person on the other side of the aisle,
yes.
and they don't even know them. And I agree. The idea of yelling and screaming and fighting for principle and then going to dinner was a time-honored tradition, and which has really disappeared. And that I have to agree.
We should
that's
also
unfortunate.
remember that this is a land of immigrants. And it's not Europe, it's not Asia, it's not Africa, but it's a combination of all. The only so-called natives were the Indians. The rest of us were foreigners. And sometimes we forget that.
What do you see as a solution to this problem? Is there a solution?
I think those of us who are a bit older should make an extra effort to demonstrate what nonpartisanship can result in. I've tried to do that in my regular work, showing my colleagues, see, you can see all these things happening. And those who serve on our committees get the message.
Well, with your committees especially, and with your relationship with Ted Stevens, as the politics have changed here over the years, and the Democrats in control at one time or Republicans the next, it has never seemed to make that much of a difference on your committee as far as the ability to produce great results, because you've worked together.
The other rule that I follow, if an incumbent Republican is running, I avoid going to that state. Because if you go in that state and say nasty things about him, he won't forget it when he gets back.
Senator, you were in the territorial legislature when Hawaii was about to become a state,
Yes.
and decided to run for Congress. What helped to prompt that decision, and what was that campaign like in an area that had never experienced a campaign like that before?
Well, to be first in anything is a great experience, because you're the pioneer and you don't know what the rules are. My first campaign, this may shock you, cost $15,000 for Congress. And this was the inaugural campaign for statehood. I had a budget of $10,000 with about 4,000 grassroots workers. And I got a contribution totaling $5,000. And I was astounded that people would contribute such big sums. But I accepted them, and we ran on a budget of $15,000. My campaign for the Senate cost me $60,000 the first time. I won't tell you what my opponent spent, but he spent many times more than I did. When Hawaii became a state, the party leaders suggested that I should run for the Senate, which I did. Then, about 2 weeks later, two elder statesmen, elders of the party, decided to run. One was a very distinguished judge member of the legal fraternity. The other had served as governor, lieutenant governor, social services director, education director. And so I withdrew, because that's the way I was brought up, to respect my elders. And they noted that, so the man who was elected for the short term said, I will finish this term and I'll retire, and retire in favor of Inouye. And he told the people to vote for me, and I ran for the Senate in '62, and here I am.
And at that time, of course, as you mentioned earlier, that the state of Hawaii had one congressman. So running for the Senate was not a different area for you. Everyone knew who you were.
It's the same area.
Same area. Was it difficult at that time, in the earlier days of statehood, to run from the several islands in Hawaii?
It's much more interesting, because today you can literally say in Honolulu and campaign, because you have television and radio, and you have DVDs that you can send around the place. I would rather go to these little islands and campaign in the villages and townships, and that to me was exciting. And I still do my best, whenever time permits, to go to these places. Now, in about 3 weeks, I'm going back to Hawaii. And at that time, this trip, I'm visiting the island of Kauai, a small island, and also Niihau. Niihau is a privately owned island, but there are people there who are my constituents, and I wanted to see them and report to them what's happening here. I realized that I could make more hay in some school auditorium in Honolulu meeting 1,000 people, more than Niihau meeting 200, you know. But I get my kicks out of that.
Our final question is the legacy question. Over and above the things you've accomplished or are yet to accomplish, how would you like to be remembered?
This may sound foolish, but I just want people to know I tried my best.
Can't ask for any more than that. Senator, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you giving us your time today.